A metaphor or analogy that I've found useful over these past few days is that of the professional photographer. And this actually initially came up at Test Retreat, which was a few days before CAST, on a session on defocusing techniques. Now, focusing and defocusing are, I think, fairly well established testing terms. This is a technique I first ran into when I was playing testing dice with James Bach, and I would do something and he would tell me what he saw, what the name of what I was doing was. That behavior, he would say, oh, that's defocusing. You know, you've gotten off that particular thing, you're looking at the broader picture, and so we call that defocusing. And there where you're zooming in on that particular thing and trying to learn more about that, we call that focusing. So these are very useful ideas, and as we were talking about it, I realized that these are not necessarily completely natural all the time for people to do, where to shift your focus so freely. And that's why we had to have this session on focusing and defocusing techniques, defocusing especially. So the metaphor, this is sort of a lightning talk in two parts, and it's funny because I made that same error last time. And the first one is about the analogy itself, which is you've got a professional photographer, and this is a person who is working carefully to find interesting or useful or meaningful information and then capture it in the frame that gives it that beauty, interest, or meaning. So this is an exercise of framing information and getting it right in a way that's going to mean something to someone. And for a photographer, focus is part of the process of information selection, and it's as natural as pointing the camera itself. Like, you bring it up to your eye and frame the shot, and they're adjusting the focus at the same time, trying to find that right depth. So that's the analogy, and it's deeper than that, and you can go into it in a lot of different ways, but I don't have an unlimited amount of time, so I think I'll stop there. But there's a lot of optics analogies available if you start thinking about it in terms of this is a different profession that also seeks and frames information. The specific techniques are what the second part of this talk is about, that I use for adjusting my mental focus, because this is fairly easy for me. This is something that I've done for a long time, but even I, who am pretty familiar with it, sometimes notice that my focus is stuck, or I'm having too much trouble seeing the bigger picture, or focusing on one particular thing, or focusing on a different particular thing than the one that I've become caught on. And so there are two ways that I have time to talk about to deal with this, that I think I have time to talk about. And the first way is something I learned from Star Trek: reverse the polarity. So if you've got something that you're really attracted to, that you're really focused on, and you want to get a broader picture, get away from it. Turn that attraction into a repulsion. You know, if you're fixated on pixels, zoom way out. Try look at something else, some other way of seeing the same problem. And that can be one way of breaking your focus free. Now, in Star Trek, reversing the polarity always works. This does not always work. and so, in some ways, it's the simpler technique. The more powerful technique is abstraction and metaphor. And this is about just giving yourself a different way to think about things. When you don't feel like you have any options, metaphor adds options. I use a tool to get myself thinking differently and allow me to shift my focus, to refocus, defocus, focus, whatever I need to do, called the oblique strategies. And this is a deck of cards that have little words or phrases on them. And they're not testing specific, though sometimes you'll find that they really seem so. But they're really useful for changing the way you're thinking. So I have an online version here, and I'll just read you a couple to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. We're going to get different ones than we got last time, too, so that's nice. You don't have to be ashamed of using your own ideas. Do the words need changing? Use an unacceptable color. Tidy up. Is there something missing? Courage. Now, this is a deep deck of cards, and there's a lot of things in there. It's the oblique strategies. You can find an online version. I'll tweet about it afterwards. But the important thing is, none of these may seem immediately applicable to whatever it is that you think you're trying to think about or not think about, because focus is this complex working of the mental aperture. The photographer has this two focusing problems, right? What I want to focus on and how I achieve that particular optical effect. And one of those is solved, right? You rotate the rings and you get the particular effect you're looking for. It's a mechanically done thing. These types of techniques that I've just talked about are sort of the equivalent of that for the mind's eye. These are rings you can grab onto and try and move around to create that mechanical effect of changing the focus. The other problem the photographer faces is just selecting the right focus. And that's your other problem, is trying to decide what effect you're going to go for. And I can't help you with that. That's a whole set of skills of noticing, and you can draw an analogy with autofocus there. But I find these things very useful. When your mind is stuck and you need to get it released so that you can focus on other things, these sorts of abstraction, metaphor, and analogy are extremely powerful. They're freeing. In that moment of confusion where you're trying to first apply some new way of looking at something, you may have been stuck before, but in the moment of abstraction, you're free. I have 10 seconds left, so I'll mention that you could, in fact, hire me to do testing on your product.
I just want to give some support and a recommendation to hire Jesse. That's all I want to say. Yeah.
Thank you, Hillary.
You signed trees on that.